kindly agreed to be a moderator for this one. This is my dream panel in academia. In the same panel, who's literally leading the Hallyu studies. For example, Dr. Cho, I remember he was one of the very few people who pioneered Hallyu studies, even before Psy, Gangnam Style, before BTS, and also Dr. Lee and Dr. Eunjung Kim, who's also pioneering the K-pop studies and webtoon studies, as well as the writer Koyeon Kim, one of my favorite, who's literally one of very few, most popular Korean writer, not just in science fiction, but also Korean literature overall. So, of course, I kindly agreed to join this wonderful panel. So, 너무 감사합니다, 선생님, 같이 해주셔서. Yeah, okay, so Dr. Cho kind of covered the big picture of Korean wave, managed education in academia, as well as Dr. Lee also talked about K-pop. So now I'm going to talk about film and TV drama, with how this specific genre, science fiction and fantasy, is dominating this visual media and media space. So my title of my paper today is Reimagining the Colonized Futures, the South Korean Media Space of Science Fiction and Fantasy. The subject of this paper focuses on the recent inclination of South Korean films and visual media for science fiction and fantasy. So historically, these genres have endured prolonged periods of neglect within the realm of Korean literature as well as visual media. Both science fiction and fantasy were habitually dismissed, as I said. So the prevalent perception of these genres in South Korea classified them as B-class genres where their utility was principally confined to children's science education. So the Korean terminology for science fiction, 공상과학 소설, provides further insight into this perception. The term itself integrates an additional adjective, 공상, corresponding to concepts such as daydreaming, fantastical, or fanciful, coupled with 과학소설 denoting science fiction. So this lexical combination indicates an understanding of science fiction in Korea as excessively imaginative or daydream-like, underscoring its perceived detachment from reality or societal values. So historically dismissed in favor of sunmunhak or pure literature, often associated with realist literature, the genre of science fiction and fantasy is currently experiencing an unprecedented surge in South Korea. So this upswing is particularly evident when analyzing the bestseller list for the fiction on Kyobo Books website, South Korea's leading online bookstore, which I will not focus too much because I'll focus on the visual media today. So despite a majority of South Korean science fiction novels not being translated into English, so recent trends indicate a shift as well in translation of South Korean literature, especially in science fiction and fantasy. So as you can see here, with 3 English translations of the lover and writer Kim Go-young who came here today, and also the other writers who are related with these genres, science fiction and fantasy, translated and introduced in English into the United States and other countries. As Korean popular culture has begun to garner international attention, the literature translation. So the upswing of science fiction and fantasy has been also notably apparent in visual media, specifically across diverse streaming service platforms, Disney Plus, Netflix, so forth and so on. So this revitalization traces its origins to the esteemed film director Bong Joon-ho, whose seminal science fiction film The Host paved the way for later successes such as Snowpiercer and Okja. So consequently, a variety of South Korean science fiction films transcending a broad spectrum of genres have garnered significant acclaim in the United States and other global markets, as demonstrated by these examples. Likewise, the marketplace for South Korean webtoons and web novels, mediums that predominantly resonate with Generation Z readers, has soared, reaching an impressive value of $170 million. And a significant majority of South Korean webtoon and web novel authors utilize the expansive genres of speculative fiction, focusing predominantly on these 3 themes, such as return, time travel to the past, possession by soul, and reincarnation, right? 환생, 회귀, 빙의, 환생, right? So which I will also not focus too much because Dr. Kim will give us a great presentation about it. So with all this in mind, this manuscript today endeavors to dissect the social cultural context that instigated this sudden boom of science fiction and fantasy in Korea, in addition to scrutinizing its 3 unique characteristics. So first, unique traits, a trait that I found from current contemporary South Korean cheap dramas and film, is no science fiction. So before talking about the marginalization of science fiction in Korea, I will begin with the origins and historical trajectory of science fiction in Anglophone tradition like UK and US, as it merits exploration of facilitating comparative study with its Korean counterpart. So Carl Friedman, in his work Critical Theory and Science Fiction, posits that the inception of science fiction as a genre arguably coincided with the emergence of another genre, historical novel. So he writes, arguably, the first science fiction novel, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and the first historical novel, Sir Arthur Scott's Waverley, serve as archetypal examples, respectively. So Friedman contends that both seminal works are corollaries of the European readers' inaugural widespread experience of the French Revolution. So his argument suggests that the birth of historical novel and science fiction resulted from a nascent collective identity experienced by Europeans due to the French Revolution. This newfound shared consciousness allowed them to envision their unified collective past in historical fiction and collective future in science fiction. Yet an intriguing contrast exists within the South Korean literature. So in Western Europe, historical novels or television dramas have already enjoyed considerable popularity over numerous decades in the 20th century. In South Korea, science fiction has largely remained on the periphery of the mainstream, while historical drama was already popular. So one of the very first South Korean science fiction films, Resurrection of the Little March Girl, proved to be both a commercial and artistic disaster. So this failure resulted in the bankruptcy of the film production company and film critics' disdain, thereby augmenting and worsening the prevailing stigmatization and stereotypes associated with the science fiction genre. So this unpopularity and stigma led to many works within the genre being downplayed or misclassified. For example, Bong Joon-ho's 2006 film The Host. So in my opinion, this is a very clear, good science fiction film, but the film production company, they didn't classify or market it as a science fiction. And you can see here, the first one was action, fantasy, and the second one they marketed as in the commercial, they marketed as a family drama. So they hide, this is not science fiction. So of course, there can be another explanation why science fiction was not properly classified in South Korea, because Korean literary genre classification does not necessarily align with Western genre categories, of course, right? Given the significant differences between the two cultures and history. So in this context, Jamaican-born Canadian science fiction writer Neil Hopkinson has noted that Western genre categorization don't invariably apply to non-Anglophone societies. So for example, in Whispers from the Coventry Route, she argues that, quote, Northern science fiction and fantasy emerged from a rational and skeptical approach to the world, but the Caribbean, much like the rest of the world, such as Korea, tends to have a different worldview. So the irrational, inexplicable, the mysterious exist side by side with the daily events of life, unquote. Likewise, South Korea has historically maintained many non-realistic literary traditions such as folklore, myths, and ghost stories. So this makes the distinction between science fiction and fantasy somewhat different, right, or complicated here in South Korea. And here's the second characteristic I found in Korean science fiction: no future. Despite the prevalent stigma, some films did achieve success. However, it is noteworthy that there is a symmetry within Korean science fiction between imagining a collective future instead of favoring revisitation of the past by time travel narratives. So for example, in the early 2000s, prior to the first Hallyu wave, several science fiction films emerged, deploying time travel narratives. Examples include 은행나무 침대, Kara, and 동갑, Gito, and 2009 Lost Memories. So each narrative utilizes implies to journey back to specific epoch, be it a millennium ago or Japanese colonial era or the 1980s. Of course, most of these films didn't market the films as a science fiction. They did like romance or the person's social critique. So this retrospection continues to pervade contemporary South Korean science fiction and fantasy works, not just in the 1990s. So as observed in these examples, Signal 9, Global Internal, all going back to the past. Right? Therefore, we can see there is this particular asymmetry within Korean science fiction between apparent disinterest in the construction of collective future and predominant interest in revisiting the past. So a myriad of cultural and social factors may contribute to this observed asymmetry within South Korean literature and visual media. So one example can be, one explanation can be the enduring collective historical trauma inflicted by events such as Korean War, dictatorship, May 18 Gwangju uprising. So these events have not been sufficiently healed and socially processed for many decades, thereby leaving a lasting impact on the Korean social psyche and the limits of imagination. Another contributing factor may be historically limited scope for envisioning Koreans as proactive participants in space travel and future technology. So Tae-Hoon Lee, in his recent article titled A Preface to the Study of Geopolitical Assets, he argues that, quote, this is a little long quote, but it worth it, so bear with me. He says, South Korean readers, having gone through the histories of the Japanese colonial era, Korean War, and the period of underdevelopment, as well as nations' perpetual division fueled by the international politics of the US, China, Japan, and Russia, Korean readers found it awkward and unrealistic to freely envision Korean characters in Korea as portrayed by a Korean writer, given the complex web of geopolitical constraints. So these 20th century Korean science fiction novels reveal the constraints on imagination that seem to stifle both readers and writers alike. So he argues that because Korea has been, suffered so many years of colonization and its geopolitics, so the writers kind of prohibits writers to imagine future or decolonized condition. So indeed, even in the 1980s and 90s, given Korea's ongoing reliance on Western scientific advances and Japanese technological products, the idea of Korean individual aboard a spaceship or an engineer pioneering future technologies might have been viewed as overly ambitious and far-fetched. So in this context, the recent surge in South Korean science fiction films and dramas is noteworthy. The significance of these works lies not solely in their global popularity, but also in their novel themes, particularly their engagement with the envisioning of a collective Korean future, a theme conspicuously absent in previous Korean science fiction works. So all these productions fall within the hard science fiction genre, a category previously underrepresented in South Korean visual media. It existed, right, in literature, like writer Boyang Kim did, right? So, for example, The Silent Sea and Space Sweeper managed to achieve commercial success, despite being space travel narrative featuring Korean astronaut at the center of the plot, a theme that has historically been disdained. It is also significant to note that this newly emerging imaginary futurity in South Korean science fiction synchronizes with the launch of the first Korean space rocket, YOO, in 2021. So following the successful launch of the second YOO in 2022, space travel transitioned from an outlandish concept to a tangible reality for the most of the Korean audiences. Notably, the similarity between the names of the Korean space rocket YOO and the Korean title of Space Sweeper 승리호 is quite telling. It reflects the shift in Korean audiences' perception of space travel narrative, transitioning from fantastical notions to something familiar and plausible. The correlation between successful launch of YOO, Korea's first space rocket, and the subsequent flourishing of her science fiction in South Korea is a fascinating point of departure, particularly when contrasted with the trajectory of science fiction within Western history. So this is interesting comparison for me because the launch of Sputnik, the first artificial Earth satellite by the Soviet Union in 1957, began the decline, not increase, but decline in popularity of her science fiction in the West, in the UK, in Europe, in Russia, as opposed to promoting it. So the late 1950s and 60s witnessed a radical paradigm shift in the Anglophone science fiction literature, the rise of new wave of science fiction writers who distanced from classic hard science fiction themes like space travel, alien planets, and they made a turn towards soft science fiction. Multiple socio-historical factors have been suggested by scholars as catalysts for this transformation, one of them being the launch of Sputnik. For example, SF scholar Brian Elvis, he wrote, "Space travel was a dream. It was a part of the power fantasy of the science fiction magazines. When space travel became reality, the dream was taken away from them. The impossible had happened. People began to expect the unexpected," right? And also the other writer, critic, by the 1970s, it became clear that space travel was a bit dull. So when space travel became reality in the West, interest in narratives centered around it diminished. Conversely, when space travel became a reality in South Korea, interest in such narratives surged. So this difference offers a captivating lens through which to examine the cultural uniqueness of Korean science fiction, particularly unique cultural context that began the science fiction boom in South Korea. So here's my last point. No decolonized future. So it is pertinent to highlight the specific nature of the future imaginaries depicted in recent South Korean narratives of space exploration. So if you think about the Hollywood examples, such as The Martian, Avatar, so forth and so on, they feature narratives predicated on venturing into outer space with the intention of establishing human colonies on the new planet. Contrastingly, the representation of the future in South Korean space travel narrative notably diverges from this model. Instead of depicting a unified human endeavor against the adversaries of alien world, South Korean narratives underscores a deeply colonized society in existing hierarchies of power. Racial discrimination, colonization are not only preserved but often exacerbated in this imagined future. So for example, space sweepers present South Korean astronauts being subject to discrimination by Caucasian character. The Silent Sea, it narrates a story where the Korean moon exploration base is subservient to and under the influence of Western counterparts such as US and Russia. Zombie film, Peninsula, offers a bleak view of Korean people who are, as a refugee in Hong Kong, and there is also Caucasian character who is discriminating South Korean. Which reminds me of like this white character in Squid Game as well. So we can see, even though recent scientific and economic development made it possible for South Korean artists to imagine space travel and collective future, it is still colonized and racialized future space. So let me conclude with Mark Fisher's quote, in which he says, "It is easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism." He talked about American science fiction. So I want to change this a little bit to talk about South Korean the characteristic. Within South Korean science fiction, it is easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of the colonialism. So I think, therefore, the conception of the future has now permeably entered the speculative realm of South Korean science fiction. However, a decolonized future still appears as an elusive, perhaps even inconceivable construct. Therefore, it is essential to advocate for a new framework of thought, a uniquely South Korean Confucianism that strives to envision futures that are freed from the vestiges of colonial domination. Thank you so much.